The Pale Jackals are this channel's offspring, the Chaos Renegade Warband that was tricked into chaos by the Changer of Ways. But more on that by the end of the month. Today let's do an old school painting tutorial, and I used this miniature that was gifted to me by a viewer called Alex, and to honor that he will stand for all the jackals from the past and the coming ones in the future. The trick with painting white is not to start with white. And since the Pale Jackals are pretty dirty anyway, I start with Dark Rust by Vallejo that I just apply all over the miniature with an old beaten up brush. And when that's done, it was time for neutral grey. I go all over the armor panels in a more or less dry brushing motion, trying to avoid the deepest recesses until I have a miniature that looks like a word bearer before they turned red. And once that was dry, I repeat the process, but this time with wolf grey. And I only aim to cover about 80% of the miniature. If there are still some dark greyish spots, it will only elevate the paint job. For the cables and armor joints, I go with just dark silver by Pro Acryl. These aren't a vital part of the miniature anyway, so I can easily just leave them in a dark metallic hue. The golden parts on the other hand are pretty significant. I use Pro Acryl's bronze for that, and I neatly paint the trim and chaosy or Space Wolfen symbols. And when the metallic parts were done, I changed my painting water, yes, this is an important part, so I don't have any metallic pigments in my bristles. And once I change that, I paint the brown parts, which mostly are the furs, leathers, bones and straps, with burnt red. I know with my style of painting it may not come across like this, but I work with the same basic techniques like everyone else. Only that I mix colors a little more often, I guess. I also work with base coating, shading and highlighting. If there's a little bit of overspill, I would recommend cleaning mistakes at this stage, because after this one it's way harder. And now it's time for the first shade, so to say. I paint all over the golden metallics with watered down jade. When diluting paint with water, it's very important to get the correct consistency, which in this, and I guess most other cases, is the point where the pigments are still bound to each other and not floaties in your water. Sorry, I forgot that I'm German. Water. At this point there's no problem with overspillage, since it will look more realistic because of that. And with that done, I repeat the process with Vallejo's Game Wash Black, which I also use to shade all the silver metallic bits. One of the key features of the Pale Jackals is this dirty sepia-like armor. And I use exactly that. Game Wash Sepia. Just as a quick tip, this shade needs a lot of shaking, since the pigments can clog up on the bottom of the container according to my experience, which turns the shade glossy and can absolutely ruin the paint job. I carefully go all over the recesses, sometimes even twice, to have a more saturated color. I repeat that process with a watered down burnt red, which I mostly apply to the legs, deepest of recesses and the areas that face downwards. It is even possible to mix it with the sepia to get a really dirty, smudgy color. And after that it's time to paint some very few streaks using burnt red and sometimes dark rust. And the next step is to paint the leather still using burnt red in a 50-50 mix with Parasite Brown to achieve this color close to orange. Maybe ochre is the correct one. But I only aim for the most outstanding features, and it's even better if it's pretty random. And now it's time to bring back the white with Vallejo's white. I carefully stipple it on using a good brush, aiming for the parts like the knees, chest, shoulders and backside of the legs. I also pick out the edges here, since this is, at least for my taste, making the paint job look cleaner, even if it resembles a very dirty miniature. Does it make sense for you? I hope. The main part is not to cover everything, only picking out some highlights. For bigger parts like this shoulder, I go for a dry brushing and stippling hybrid approach, and it's better to have less paint in the bristles than to have too much and have it painted in 2 or 3 coats. The same unconventional technique is used when I edge highlight the leathers and the bones using Elfic Flash. Up until this point, the Pale Jackals only use more or less natural colors. Not that red isn't a natural color, but it really stands out. I pick out all the gems if I want to paint them, and the eyes to give them a good coverage of gory red. And if there is a little bit of gory red in the area around them, it's even better. After that I mix in some whites to get this lovely pinkish hue, which for me is the peak chaos color, and apply it to the edges around the light source. The last step is to elevate the eye glow using only white. I had to correct some mistakes here because of course I dropped the brush with red on it on his face. And as we reach the last steps of this paint job, it's time to pick out the verdigris gold and give it a little bit more saturation once again using Pro Acryls Jade. For the trim, which is arguably one of the most defining parts of a Chaos Space Marines, I used Pro Acryls Light Bronze to edge highlight it. With an old brush, this really gives a worn down look, especially when one doesn't paint that neatly and uses a more or less stippling approach. After all, these guys are around for a couple of millennia, even though the warp concealed them for the longest time. And with that done, it's only the base that's missing, for which I use AK Interactive's Dry Ground and wet blend a little bit of dark purple into it. I mostly aim for the areas underneath the miniature itself. By the way, by the end of the month you'll get a bonus video of a very different kind. The inverse origin story of the Pale Jackals. And with that said, thank you for watching, don't forget to leave a like or a subscription, and if you like to support this channel, feel free to check out my Patreon or channel membership, and we are going to see each other in the next one.